great pleasure to have Professor Parthapratim Das as a guest speaker in today's session. And it's very difficult to introduce him also because, see, he's possibly my oldest academic collaborator. We have done BTech projects together at IIT Kharagpur, and a very close friend of mine. And he's an academician as well as an entrepreneur. And his area of interest had been started with digital geometry, worked on compilers, worked on language, worked on VLSI. And currently he's heading NDLI and also his research interest in terms of digital media, particularly dance, digital archiving of dance and understanding of dance. These are his interest areas. And so he's a very most appropriate speaker to talk to digital humanities students. And his sharpness in terms of dealing with things, his clarity of his concepts, and he's an excellent teacher. I think I can vouch for it because as an undergrad, I in fact as a classmate I had approached him number of times, and he used to take classes for us also. And there used to be other people together taking classes. So he's a fantastic teacher. So it's really a great occasion for IIT Jodhpur, and we are looking forward to the talk. But sadly, I have some other assignments also, so I shall drop off in between. PPD, please carry on. And it's I hope you enjoy your interaction with the students.
Thank you, Professor Chaudhuri. Really, I don't know if I deserve so much of compliments, but thank you for inviting me to this forum. And naturally, as you mentioned, I have a deep interest in computer analysis of dance, so maybe someday I would also like to talk about that. Before I start off, I would just like to make a small, I should say, clarification that though I manage the National Digital Library of India on a more regular day-to-day basis, it is the principal investigator of this project is actually Professor Parthapratim Chakraborty, who was our director when this project got originally approved, and I'm the joint principal investigator. So I think without much delay, I will share my presentation and start talking about the digital library. So is the presentation visible?
It is coming up. Yes, it is visible.
Okay. So the way I structured it from this point onwards, I would primarily address the students because that's for whom this whole thing is organized for. So the way I have organized this presentation after some discussions with Professor Moiraki is that this will be on the National Digital Library of India project as a case study, but I will talk a little bit in more generality in terms of how to build a digital library, why to build a digital library, what to build for in a digital library. And in every such case, I would also take recourse to specific instances of what we did, and that may not be the unique thing to do, but that will give the students here, particularly focusing on digital archives, as to what the archives should offer and how should it be organized. So welcome to this talk, Building a Digital Library is how I have titled it. And as Director and Moiraki has introduced, I'm a professor of computer science. So you may take my knowledge of library and the whole thing with a little bit of pinch of salt. I have learned whole of this subject in the last 5 years since I started doing this project in 2015. This will be the very broad outline of what I'm going to discuss. Naturally, the first is I'm sure as digital humanities students, you would be familiar with much of these, but still I would just start from my point in terms of why we need digital libraries and what is a digital library. And then I'll do a walk through the National Digital Library of India, its portal, and a little bit of features. And then I'll dwell at length on digital library design. What are the design issues? What are the design parameters? What are the design factors that one needs to look at? And in each one of them, I will take specific example from NDLI. And before I conclude, I will make some comments about the lessons that all of us have learned from COVID, which COVID pandemic, which has given a different dimension to all these digital technologies, particularly the digital library and digital learning. So, and though mostly I will be talking, but I would encourage students to raise any question that they have or any comment that they make. Just unmute yourself, stop me, and feel free to interact. It's need not be a one-way traffic all through the time. So why digital library? So if you look at the current situation, then any nation today needs a quality lifelong education and knowledge, which is available anytime, anywhere, to anybody. So that's a very broad requirement that nations have today. And particularly nations like us, which have a very large population, and even though only a small fraction of our population currently has the privilege of getting right education, certainly our ambition, aspiration, and the rightly so, is to provide education to all. And brick and mortar institutions like these IITs or NITs or other colleges, institutions, they are not sufficient alone. They are not sufficient to provide quality education to anybody, anytime, anywhere, and so on. So you take recourse to digital technologies. And so what you build is a digital library as an open and inclusive infrastructure. Openness is, as you all know, is the key concept of the digital paradigm. So, and when I talk of openness, I do not only mean open contents, which can be accessed easily by anyone, but I mean openness of everything, openness of policies, openness of infrastructure. In NDLI, we build everything with open source software, and open in every sense of the term, and it must be inclusive for all. That is inclusive in terms of disciplines, inclusive in terms of every level of education, inclusive in terms of languages, inclusive in terms of user groups, and so on. So that's kind of the ground reality that we have to satisfy. So a digital library of a nation is an encompassing knowledge repository that can represent the knowledge and cultural asset of a country. Right. So given that some of the fact sheets here, talking very specifically about India, we are on a demographic dividend that you all must be knowing, that we are having, or soon to have, the largest working population in the world, with about 1 million of our citizens turning every month. So there is a huge challenge in terms of getting them rightly skilled. About 5-6 years back, in 2014-15 time frame, the then MHRD, now Ministry of Education, had done a survey with FICCI to assess that if every Indian student who needs to go for higher education, who are eligible for that, if they need to go for higher education, then what would it take to enroll them? So it was assessed that we will need, over a period of 20 years, that is what they took as a time frame of someone to grow up. Over a period of 20 years, that would need India to set up 6 universities and 270 colleges every month. So 240 months, every month, if you set up 6 universities and 270 colleges, then for our deserving population, you can provide the higher education that they need. If you come to school education, the infrastructure need will be even much higher. But this clearly tells us that this is not something which is feasible to be done. We are the fourth largest producer of doctorates in the world after US, Germany, and UK. And we have a lot of, digital priorities that we have identified. Ministry of Education and government has identified as a strong leveler for our population. Coupled with that, we have the unique distinction of using a large number of languages. We have 22 languages in our 8th schedule, which are official, which means that in all of these 22 languages, you can have K-12 education. And you do have some institutions which provide that. Some of these languages are used also for higher education. So it's a big multilingual challenge when you talk about this kind of education. So in this perspective, let's just take a look at what the Ministry of Education broadly has been trying to do in terms of setting up a digital ecosystem for education. And of that, one side was certainly sponsoring several projects to create digital content, different kinds of virtual library, spoken tutorial, different content material for lectures and so on. But eventually it got into the largest government-sponsored MOOCs program, which is currently called SWAYAM, where a student can not only listen to lectures by a very established, good professor, as well as the student can take regular assignments, take examination at the end of the course, and in that process actually acquire a grade and certificate. And it has been with that, the credit transfer mechanism have also been put into place over the last 2 years. So for several colleges and universities, they have identified MOOCs courses, SWAYAM courses, which students can do, get the grade, and actually get it transferred to their credit, to their transcript. So there are programs like SWAYAM, which runs regularly every twice a year in semester basis, mostly available over the internet. There is SWAYAM Prabha, which are, some more assistive learning in terms of programs in the direct-to-home TV channels and so on. So there is a good amount of emphasis happening in terms of delivering content, delivering the education. And naturally, when students start taking these courses, start learning, they need the access to the knowledge repository. They need access to the knowledge source from where they can get the right material for their courses. And that is the basic need for a digital library at a national level, which is the context of the National Digital Library of India, which should be available over internet as well as mobile. So that's the basic ecosystem we are talking of. Now, if we say that, well, why do we need a digital library? I mean, why not Google? Google has served the knowledge requirement for most of us over a long period of time. I have been teaching several courses for last several years, and many of those courses did not even exist when I graduated. So certainly I never studied them from my teachers. So where did I educate myself? Where do I educate myself? So it is usually always on Google. You go to Google, you find out, and so there is a huge plethora of content available. But given that, what are the gaps that actually exist? So if you look on the left, the user side, as to what are our users' challenges, we have a big, wide geographic expanse. We have a large population. We have huge number of students, large number of institutions, linguistic variety. We have severe lack of teachers, right? So these are some of the challenges. And on the provider side, if you look at green, as I mentioned, that there is a wealth of digital content available. Books, articles, thesis, question paper, video lectures, you name it, several are already there, available on the net. Many of them under subscription, several of them in the open space and so on. But the difficulty is, and that difficulty you have to assess, understanding that all students who need to get educated are not privileged like us. They are not that digital savvy. While finding an information in Google is simple, but it is also very complex because you have to ask the right question to Google to get the right set of answers. And then when you get that, you are taken to a repository, to a collection, which has its own idiosyncrasies. I mean, there are different digital library engines used. There are different ways to navigate and so on. All these are key challenges to the students. So there is no single window search available. Google search itself uses keywords from the content, but Google does not naturally empower their search with metadata. And we will talk a lot about this as to the role of metadata in this whole digital library aspect. It has widely varied digital library technology. It has lack of interactivity because every repository has been built with some objective of its own, and you are trying to just access them together through the glasses of Google to create your knowledge library, which is not the ideal way of doing that. Multilinguality is a basic requirement. There is low integration between content and learning system. Every content does not immediately mean learning. You just cannot learn just by getting the book. You need the book, you need the syllabus, you need the identification of what you have to learn. You need the checkpoints, question papers, solutions, tutorials, all of that builds your learning system, much of which is provided by the teacher. So in the lack of a teacher, Google itself cannot serve that role unless you are matured enough to do that for yourself, which most of our students unfortunately are not. So these are the kind of gaps which can be bridged by creating a proper digital library. So there are several reasons, as you can see. Many of the reasons are generic across the world. Many of the reasons are specific to a country like India, which has less resources, a lot of opportunities, but a lot of challenges at the same time. So what is a digital library? So let us draw a parallel between a traditional library and a digital library. So all of us, even though it is getting, unfortunately, somewhat out of fashion to go to library, many of us are not going. We are just confining ourselves to the machine. But if you go to the library, then you search for a content, and for that you have different kinds of catalogs, author catalog, indexes, title indexes, or say access your call number based indexes, and you can search, locate a book, browse through that. You can borrow it. You can go to the reference librarian to get some reference material. There are book clubs and so on. So these have been the evolution of the traditional library, which has happened over, astonishingly over 10,000 years. I mean, the oldest library dates back to more than 10,000 years. On the digital library, naturally, you have all of that. You are expected to have all of these, but with the difference that you are talking about an enormously bigger scale, lot more of scale. What you can search in a big library like IIT Kharagpur, I'm sure IIT Jodhpur is also having a good library by now, is nothing compared to what you can digitally search on a collection. So the scale, the speed, everything becomes very, very different. So you are getting the same information at a much larger scale, at a much higher efficiency. But digital library does not really stop at being a digital form of a traditional library. It is a concept by itself which introduces a lot of extensional services, like you can access it anytime. Your library opens and closes at a reasonable time, but your digital library never closes. You can do a remote login. You can use multi-format data, which in a traditional library often you cannot do. You can only use printed material or charts or documents, but you, for example, cannot have a multimedia content available easily in a traditional library. So these extensions to the form of delivery of knowledge or encapsulation of knowledge gives digital library a very different dimension. And then comes a lot of new things which are coming up, which I normally call disruptive developments in terms of a digital library. For example, you can, in digital libraries can provide you data discovery services. That is, today, every discipline has to rely on machine learning to advance the education, to advance the research, which is even if you are not from that background, you can simply take it as machine learning is nothing but learning from large number of examples. So if you have a large number of examples, you have somebody somehow annotates them saying that, this is a positive example, this is a negative example, this is red, this is green, this is blue. Then the machine can use several smart algorithms, techniques to develop a strategy by which machine can categorize, machine can talk about items that machine has not seen of. We go to Facebook today, and on Facebook you put your photographs of your friends with you. Facebook will immediately prompt that this photograph is of Professor Shantanu Chaudhuri. This photograph is of Professor P.P. Das, and so on and so forth. How does it do it? So these happen through a lot of annotated databases. So they are becoming a very key component of digital library, which traditional libraries did not have. You are even having compute databases where you not only have the data set collections, but you have also library collections, library in the sense of computing library collection, which you can fire on those data sets on the cloud and actually solve several of the problems that you are facing with. So AI plus machine learning, deep learning, frontier of research, all those can rely heavily on a digital library in a disruptive way than what was happening in the traditional library. So there are a lot of normal transitions, gradual transitions, extensional transitions, and disruptive transitions, which make a digital library what it is. So very broad set of objectives for a digital library. It can be defined in several other ways also. It's a 24/7 enabled infrastructure with search and browse being the primary services, covering all academic levels, disciplines, multiple languages, all possible different domains of industry, economy, and preferably is built as a repository over other repositories. Like in a physical traditional library, you need to get every copy of that book, whatever your users can use physically in that library. Here you don't do that. What you do is more a referential design called a federated structure, that you need to know, well, if this content I need digitally, then what is the repository that has that content? And all that again happen through metadata mechanisms, descriptors of these items, and you harvest or fetch the metadata from different collections, make them into a central store, and that becomes your library. You can provide user interfaces which are in local language. You can provide user interface which is friendly to differently abled users, and so on and so forth. So these are the broad objectives that a digital library has to satisfy. Naturally, I have already mentioned about diversity of contents. The range of contents could be traditional books and articles and so on, reports, etc. But they could also be lecture slides, could be videos, could be audiobooks, courseware, question paper, test platforms, data sets, benchmarks, maps, painting, everything. So there's a wide variety of content that we are talking of. So we have briefly tried to mention about why a digital library and what is a digital library. So I will go specifically a little bit into the National Digital Library of India that we have been building for the last 5 years, which I'm sure Professor Moraki has given you the link to register. I would hope that you have registered and started playing around with it. Even if you haven't, you can go to Google and type National Digital Library of India. The first link will come up to give you to that access. Now, this is just to give some bare facts. It is sponsored by Ministry of Education since April 2015, and it is developed by IIT Kharagpur, whom Ministry had entrusted 5 years back. We are still continuing with the same team. It has about 6 crore items, not in the sense that its server does not store 6 crore items. Its server stores information about 6 crore items, by which they can be found out. And that covered about 400 plus languages, and it is participated, it is collaborated and contributed from about 330 sources, and it has lakhs of users. We actually do not have a very strict count. So this is just a repeat of what a objectives of a digital library is. So that is what NDLI is. It is a digital library, somewhat to the context of India in some cases, but otherwise it is accessible, open to everyone in the world. It hosts multimedia contents, text, video, audio, image, everything of different domains and disciplines. Now, these are some of the kind of uniqueness and reach of the National Digital Library. It's a single window multilingual search. So you can search through the same interface in multiple languages and find the information. Covers the entire spectrum of learners, starting from very primary, early stage learner to the lifelong learners. Can handle contents of any type. It has Indian language interfaces in 10 languages, so besides English. So if you are more comfortable with one of these 10 languages, then you can use an interface which is of that language. And these 10 languages are chosen in a way, so that covers about 97% of our population. Remaining 12 languages and others are still to be done. It has personalization. I will talk more about personalization at a later point of time, that how it really caters to you as an individual. And the same query done by someone else may actually lead to a different kind of result that caters to that someone else, right? So that's kind of the basic features. These are basic statistics. About 15,000 plus institutions participate, means that students and teachers of about 15,000 plus institutions currently use this. We have an average daily hit of about 1 lakh footfall on the library, 6 crore items, of which about 3.5 crore are open and free. By that, what I mean is you can just click on them and get the full text. For many others, you may need different kind of access restrictions. I'll talk about those more. There's some statistics in terms of number of, estimated number of books and journals and question papers and all of that comes from about 340 sources and so on. Naturally, on the way, when you try to do something big, you earn some accolades. So National Digital Library of India also from 2017 till last year have been awarded in different for its different contributions by different organizations. Okay, now let's come to the portal. This is how the portal looks, which is available on the internet, and this is what you get to see. And you can use it on mobile app also. It is available both on Android as well as iOS, but certainly Android is which is far more popular than iOS because of the availability of the device. So I will talk a little bit, and these are some of the different language interfaces that you can use in NDLI: Bengali, Hindi, Marathi, and so on. So let me at this point stop sharing this presentation, and let me go to the portal and give you a little online demonstration of how things are. So let me try to share that. I'm taking a big risk because demos usually fail. They are meant to fail, but I hope today it will not happen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So I will go to the home page. This is the home page of the library. And students, if you have access to your digital device at the hand, you can at the same time keep doing whatever I'm doing. There is a registration available at this corner. I'm not going to go through that because that part of the work you can do even without registering, just getting there. But some of the things like personalization and some of the accesses will not work unless you register and log in. So which I'll explain on the process. Currently, I'm logged in. So what we have is, as you can see, there are two things. One is you can see search and browse on the left top. These are the basic generic services that the library has. And there is a big search box here, which also tells you the languages in which you can search. Here are the drop down to decide which language interface would you use. I will continue to use English because we are in this audience. Now, I will show you search and browse, and at a later point in the discussion, I will talk about what are coming below, which are called collections. So these are collections for different user groups and so I will search for magnetism. Right. At a later point in the lecture, you will realize why I am searching magnetism. But I mean, you can take any word for that matter. So as I search with magnetism, this is what I get to see. This is the search result. I hope you are being able to see the search result. So I have got of magnetism, I have got so many results, which is how much? It is about 12 lakh contents. Of course, of 12 lakh contents are hardly of any use, right? Because you cannot find out. I mean, it's a Google-like situation again, because you will have to. How do you find out which of these 12 lakhs you need? So you need to refine keywords. The Google strategy comes in. No, that's not what NDLI does. What you see on the left is the refinement filters. That is, well, you have come to magnetism, but if you say, let's say, if you say, well, I am interested in magnetism at the +2 level, +2 educational level, I can specify that. I can select this box. Now, as I select this, I get 1061 results, all of which have been carefully annotated to be useful at a class 11, 12, the +2 level. I can further say, okay, let me look at the authors. I remember my professor told something. I remember, say, let's take the first author, Arvind Gupta. Now you get 35 results. So 35 results based on the fact that these are for +2, +10, 11, and 12, and by the author Arvind Gupta. Right. So in this way, you can keep on refining the search. So let's, we will talk more about the refinement. Let us get into any of these contents which seem to, they are all from Professor Gupta, so looks very similar. And you get a basic information here, which says that what is the source from where it is coming. As I said, that everything is not stored in the server of NDLI. It is distributed. So this source, National Repository of Open Educational Resources, NROER, have given us the access to their repository, and we are using from there. It has some different, so it does show you the class levels other than 11 and 12, 9 and 10 also, because I have also specified Arvind Gupta. So it's bringing up everything that Arvind Gupta has written. So let's click on this to go to the item. So I'm going to that item specifically. So when I go to that item, it actually gets directed towards the original source. So this is now you are getting a view which is coming from, as you can see, NCERT. NROIR are from NCERT. So this is coming from NCERT. This is you can download it here, you can play it here, so you can do certain things with the content, whatever you want to do. What I would focus on is this is coming on the content tab. There is a metadata tab. So I have selected the metadata tab. So what does the metadata tab tell me? It tells me the descriptor of this item. That to be able to search it, filter it in an effective way, we have annotated every item with a set of field values. So of course, on top, what you see is not written by the metadata field, it's a title. It's understood to be the title. But then you have a field author which tells who is the author. So the fact that you can filter the contents based on author, you could pick up items based on Arvind Gupta, is the fact that this item has a metadata author whose value is Arvind Gupta. It talks about source, which is a link to where it is coming from. This is used for your understanding as well as for linking. It says what is the content type. It says the content type is a video. You can easily see it is a video here. It says what is the language in which this content is. Again, this is given as English. So it is possible to filter content only on languages. It says what is the subject domain, from which subject does it occur. It says it is natural sciences and mathematics. So we use a certain kind of a subject hierarchy called DDC, Dewey Decimal Classification, which is the way the call numbers are assigned in a traditional library. So it has the first level classification, which is natural sciences and mathematics. Within that comes physics. Within that comes electricity and magnetism, electricity and electronics. Within that comes magnetism. So this is the hierarchy path it is showing of the subject domain. So this is again another metadata which has been put on this object. Then I have a subject keyword. I may have more subject keywords. I have interactivity, because this is a video, so it is expositive. That is, it explains certain things to you. The educational level is 5 to 8 as well as 9 and 10, which we have searched for. Those are the metadata for educational level. It is the learning resource type, what kind of learning resource it is. Its learning resource type is given as an activity, because it's an activity video to be tried hands-on. Right? So here you can see that these descriptors are what basically tells you that tells the system that this is what the content is about, not the full text of the content that Google uses to deep dive and find some keywords onto. So by deep diving into the keywords, it is not easy to say that it is for educational level 9-10, or it is not easy to say that this comes from such and such source, or for that matter, the subject keyword should be electricity experiments and so on, right? So that these are carefully crafted by the source or by the NDLI team to give you a context which is very, very useful in terms of the use. And it says that the access restriction is open. So green open lock, which says that this is open access, so you can freely use it, download it, use it for your own purposes whatsoever. If I go back to the search result again, then I will clear these filters that I had done. Certainly, if you have a digital system, you will have server errors, server delays, all of that. Those will keep on happening. I hope that it still gives me the result. Otherwise, I'll start all over again. Let me start again. This is transitory. This will, and possibly due to my speed of connection here. Okay, so this is what the magnetism result we had. For example, I can do a different filter by choosing language, and you can see the variety of languages on which contents are available. English, of course, is expectedly very large. Out of this 12 lakh, about almost 11 lakh contents are in English, but there are contents in several other languages because they have been contributed from different other sources. Say, if I choose Hindi, then I will now get contents which are internally Hindi. They may, I mean, we are following titles here of whatever the title the source has given, but the language of the content is Hindi here. Again, on this, I can see the authors. I can choose Jayanto Dash. So I'm getting contents which are from Jayanto Dash in Hindi. So these are the different kinds of metadata and filters based on these metadata, which makes the National Digital Library, or for that matter, any well-designed digital library using appropriate forms of metadata and their values really very useful. You can also filter based on the content type on the right. You can say, okay, what I'm looking for are only audio contents. I do not know if it exists. It does. 499 audio contents are there, which are, you can see that magnetism is coming up here from LibriVox, which is a collection of audio books. So these are the different kinds of filters that you can really have. I can come back to all contents. I can look at access restriction. For example, I showed you an example of an open content. Suppose I select this limited access. So these contents marked here with an icon, you can see, are limited access, which means that these are not to be purchased, but these will need some additional access authorization by the source. Say Semantic Scholar, if you are trying to use. So if you are trying to access that, then you might need additional authorization, additional login to be done. So it is taking me to Semantic Scholar. You can see the address bar here. So it is now showing you the citations from that, and you can go to the specific one and find it out. Now I have a login to Semantic Scholar already done. You can create your login, and once you have done that, you don't need to pay, but this is not like open access, where you should get the access undeterred by any other factor. So I can say something like NDLI, which is kind of contents which are nationally subscribed. So these contents are to be purchased if you access them outside, but from NDLI you can access them openly because the government pays for that. So there are different access mechanisms or access protocols which are also part of this metadata. And so this gives you a kind of a broad view of what search and browse can do. So let me go back and show you a brief of the collection. So this is where you are checking out on the whole collection, and you can search for anything. You can browse also. Say you can browse by, say, subject. You say, okay, this is the subject that I want to browse by. So the first level, I said the subject classification is DDC. So suppose I'm browsing by social sciences. So I will get contents which are, these are the total contents whose subject is social sciences. So some 52 lakh contents on social sciences. I can do a second level source browsing also. These are subcategories of social sciences. So I can say social interaction. As I do social interaction, I will get 2,571 contents in social interaction. There is no next level in social interaction. So let's take something which has a next level. Let's say economics. So I'm browsing social sciences. Within that, economics, and within that, now I have different subcategories. So say I can browse for socialism and related concepts. Right? So 4,413 are there, and again on them again I can apply the filters. I can say, well, I want contents only in English. So I'm doing a browsing based on the subject. I've gone up to 3 levels, and within that I'm doing a filtering based on the language being English. I am looking at, say, educational level. I say, okay, this is 11, 12 is what I'm looking at. So I have 49 contents which come under that category. So it is social sciences, economics, socialism and related systems, written in English and for class 11, 12. So this is the whole kind of, search result that you get, which is very easy to tune interactively. I mean, kind of wizard interactions, kind of. And to be able to write this as a Google query would have been humongously difficult, at least for the uninitiated. So these are the, I mean, there you can browse by type, you can browse by source, you can browse by learning resource types as to whether it's a book or an article or those kind of things. You can see only the, say, the question papers. You are just looking at question papers. So there are 36,149 question papers there. So you can again filter based on those. Let's come back to the home and take a look at some of the collections. So this was on searching the whole. I can come to a collection, say CBSE examination preparation contents. So here, what has been done is taking the repository, the experts, subject matter experts have marked that these are the contents which are important for a CBSE examinee at class 10 or class 12. And then those have been annotated by source, content type, subject, and so on. So for example, let's say, if you look at it by source, it gives you from where did this content come. Did it come from a government organization like CBSE board, Diksha project, Department of Electronics or something? Did it come from Kendriya Vidyalayas? Kendriya Vidyalayas are usually very proactive in providing digital contents for their students. Or are they from different non-government organizations like Byju's, like CK12? Some of them are paid contents. Some of them are free contents, like Khan Academy, as you know, Salman Khan's Khan Academy, which is a very, very good content source for several things. So you can search this, you can get into this by browsing through subject. You can browse by content type, that if you are looking for only question papers, if you're looking for only audio content, if you're looking for only syllabus, because you are talking about a specific examination. You can browse by subject. These are all different CBSE subject types. Here, the subject does not mean the DDC classification subject. The subject is what a student has to. So we are talking now of a smaller, very specific purpose design for a user group. This is called a collection service. And we will talk about that in the generality, but I'm just showing you examples so that you understand what I'm talking of. So you can go to the specific subjects, say geography, and you get to see different kind of contents here. It also shows that this physical features of India is a content, and that content has is coming from NCERT. It is a book. It is in English. So now you can go and use that content. So this is kind of a collection-based design for different purposes that are showcased here. So the first group of these collections, or hyper collection, if you want to say that, are meant for different target user groups: the school-going kids, the CBSE examinee, engineering students, science students, humanities students, literature, law and management students, and so on. So contents, for example, if I go into engineering, you will get to see these different engineering disciplines. So there are common subjects in that, which is talking about, like, the first year level courses kind of. or you can get into the specific engineering discipline and you get the contents that are available. These are NPTEL video lectures, SWARM video lectures, and so on. There are different other video lectures. So this is the way. So for every such collection, the way you structure, the way you navigate is designed based on the target user and possible use of that collection, right? So you were seeing in CBSE, the focus was on where did it come from, what kind of subject, what kind of content type, and so on, because that's what you expect a CBSE examinee to be more focused on, whereas this is more organized in terms of disciplines, because certainly if I'm from electrical engineering, I would not like to get digressed in terms of having content from architecture. Right? So that's kind of the collection design aspect we will talk of. So these are different of these. The second band is a hyper collection on COVID research resource repository, which is a very, very unique thing that we did during COVID. I'll talk more about that later on. But here it is kind of a 360-degree research support for COVID. And this is not medical research, this is not vaccine research, this is not research specifically on medical and curative sciences, but this is research in different areas where COVID has had an impact. And if you think coolly, you'll find that you'll tell yourself that there is no area as of today where COVID does not have an impact, whether it is transportation, whether it is banking, whether it is automotives, whether it is industrial production. So everywhere you have the impact of COVID, and these are the different specific collections for research. One is scholarly publications. You need to know the papers. That's a basic part of research, all of you know. You need data sets. I was talking to you about data sets because obviously the research in areas like COVID impact will always depend on different deep learning methods. So you need data sets that people have built and annotated, different documents and videos from authentic sources. If you have done the research, where would you publish? So you'd like to have information on the journals which are publishing papers on specific COVID impact, maybe special issues of those journals, special conferences. A lot of ideas and funding options have come up, so you can get to know about those in this collection. The challenges are being thrown that if you can solve this, you will get 5 lakh rupees and so on. Startup opportunities coming up. So these are the different types of collection, which is a very specific demonstration of what a digital library can try to cater to. So the first, hyper collection was primarily focused on students. The second hyper collection is primarily on COVID research, a very specific area. And the third one is more generic. It is a featured collection for general interest, like Bharat Centenary of famous filmmaker Satyajit Ray. He was from Bengal and went on to win lifetime Oscar for his achievements in filmmaking. So NDLI has the collection of the script of his 39 films, and NDLI is the only source in the world where those scripts exist, and they're fantastically interesting scripts because they are not just texts. They are fully annotated with text, with diagram, with music notation, with even costume parts and so on. So you can enjoy that. So these are we put as featured collection because something that anybody of general interest could benefit from on this day and so on and so forth. So this is a quick walk around the National Digital Library of India. I'll just pause a little if there is any question up to this point, because after this I'm going to change track and talk on the design issues of digital library. If there is any question up to this point from anyone, I would like to address that.
If you have a question, please type it in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question to Professor Dash.
Hello, sir. I
Yes.
have a small question regarding the criteria for selection of, say, any item under any category. So any quality check that you go through or you have that you follow.
I will talk a little bit about that during the design aspects. Now, of course, if you ask specifically what NDLI does, it does two different strategies. One is for the generic collection that I showed through search and browse. For the generic collection, we do not look at the item because it's not feasible. So what we look at is who is providing the item. Kind of, if IIT Jodhpur has a digital collection of contents created from IIT Jodhpur, then we will trust that it has the quality, authenticity, and appropriateness carried to National Digital Library of India. So we will trust IIT Jodhpur to have authenticated, curated that as a content. We will not look into the specific content because in that way it is not feasible to scale up. So that is the reason you'll see that while we have 6 crore content, the content source is only 340 because each one of them is a very credible source. Either it is an institution of very high repute, or it is a department of the ministry, or it is some well-established publisher, or it is some, private organization of high repute. For example, say Sabarmati Ashram. It is still not visible in the public view of the library, but it will soon be. Sabarmati Ashram has created a collection of 12 lakh pages. Actually, now it's more. Pages on Mahatma Gandhi. It is called Gandhi Heritage Portal. So we have taken a non-exclusive license for them to carry that whole thing. Now, naturally, we will not look into those pages to see whether they are authentic because we can trust Sabarmati Ashram. So that's on one side. The other side is when we are putting this featured collections, putting these collections below, which is for a specific purpose, we look at two sides. One is we look at the source again. I mean, if the source is, we do quite a bit of reference check behind the source. So I can tell you more specifically here. For example, these are, if you look at the top, these are all very, these are government organizations meant to support education. So we can trust them. These are Kendriya Vidyalayas, we can trust them. These are different private organizations. So you are seeing probably 3, 3, 6, 12, 15 here. But I personally worked on this part. So probably there was about 55 or 60 that we had shortlisted to pick contents from. And then when we did background checks, then we did content checks, we found that, well, some have plagiarized contents, some have contents which are wrongly classified, some have contents which are wrong as such. So we eliminated all of that and chose these and picked up contents from there. So it's a mixed strategy, right? Pooja, does that answer your question? I think your name was Pooja, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Any other question?
Sir, thank you, sir, for the lecture. I have this one question about how does a disabled person access this? Can you just show an example of that? So maybe.
Unfortunately, no.
Oh, okay.
Because that disability interface is still under construction.
All right. Okay, sir.
So we are doing two things. One is we are building up a disability portal. I should have expected this question. I did not get that access to the disability portal, which is separately being developed to provide a lot of content for the disabled and also information of how you can access. For example, some disability accesses are built in your system itself. So NDLI does not need to do anything for that, like screen readout. Screen readout, you can use an NVDA reader. You can install it, it's free from NV Access Foundation. And install it and tell it what to read. And then any page you go to, any navigation you need to do, everything is read out at a certain pace. So it is an excellent kind of support for different screen readers, which can help the visually challenged. So there are some of those which are generic solutions. Some are very specific solutions. So we are still working on really completely integrating them, but what we are more focused for the differently abled are providing them content itself. content that are friendly to them. Like for an hearing impaired, you need to give content which has either subtitles on a lecture, or it has ASL on the lecture, I mean, American Sign Language notation given on the lecture, and so on. So those contents we are working with different disability organizations to collate those contents and put them. I think it will be another 3-4 months and you'll start seeing that on the portal. I'm very sorry I've not been able to demonstrate anything to you.
No
Madam.
problem, Said. It was on the slide, so and I couldn't access it also, so I thought I'll ask you if I was
Yes. Because certainly we have aspirations, right? You are seeing it after 5 years. Had you seen this after 1 year, you would not have seen much of this at all.
Yes.
But if you see it after 7 years, you will see a lot more again. Of course, that's an evolution process. Okay, I think I will get back to the presentation and talk quickly on the design aspects of the digital library. I think my presentation is visible again, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So I move on to the third and the key part of my presentation here, which is on the digital library design. So there are several aspects that you need to consider in a digital library design. Some I will touch upon, which I've put on the left in green. I said those items I've trying to touch upon, at least cover a little bit. And there are several on the right, some of which we had to really, or we still continue to work very actively on, but I will not talk about them here because certainly scope has to be finite, limited, and the scope has to cater to digital archiving primarily. But setting up a digital library finally is a live project. So it has a lot of other aspects of cost, of management, of reliability, of policies, and so on and so forth. And I know there's a very high-level policy expert sitting in the audience, Professor Prabuddha Ganguly, who has helped us on this policy part, but I'm not going to discuss on those aspects. So here I talk about the very basic things, that how do you start a digital library design? Obviously, you have to do a need analysis, right? So let's start discussing those. So you need to do a need analysis. So the first thing, you identify who is your potential beneficiaries, what are the outcomes you are looking for, what are the potential stakeholders, and do a SWOT analysis. So beneficiaries, and so I'm just giving out the points. Illustrations are all from National Digital Library of India. So potential beneficiaries, when we identified students at all level, early grade reading, adult education, professionals, differently abled, which Madam Arunima has rightly pointed out does not yet exist. But these are the beneficiaries. But if you take a different digital library, say Europeana of the European Union, their potential beneficiaries are those who are interested in culture and heritage at any level, from anywhere in the world. That's their focus. So identification of potential beneficiaries will broadly dictate how you are going to make this digital library. Then the second is what you expect as a potential outcome, that how will the beneficiaries use it and benefit from that. So our focus has been the scope for learning within, beyond, and without institutions. Within the institution, you can use it. Beyond the institution, you can use it. Or even if you are not enrolled with an institution, you should be able to use it for proper skilling, and it should improve the pedagogy of teaching, pedagogy of learning. Right? So that's the outcome that we have set forth. Europeana sets forth an outcome that with the Europeana Digital Library, the appreciation of art and culture, specifically paintings, sculptures, architectures, should get a wider audience in Europe and all across the world. So Rembrandt's miniaturization of Rembrandt's paintings are available in Europeana because that can attract people. So their outcome is if the people get attracted. Like Europeana happened, and Rembrandt's museum had over 3 years an increase of footfall in the museum of 10 times. So that's the meaning of the outcome. So our outcome is in terms of learning. Potential stakeholders as to, obviously you need funding, you need others to do it. So for us, the funding part stakeholder is government so far, the sponsor and facilitator. Institutions are contributing in terms of the content, in terms of ideas, in terms of participation, like we are contributing being the host institution as IIT Kharagpur. IIT Jodhpur is contributing as an institution, is contributing by participating in this lecture today and so on. So these are the stakeholders. There's public, which are maybe non-government organization, individuals participate in crowdsourcing and stuff like that. Industry, which is providing the technology and a lot of resources. Publishers, which are providing a lot of metadata on their contents and so on. So these are the kind of potential stakeholders, so you know whom to deal with. And finally, you do a need analysis, which is a SWOT of what you have, what are your strengths. So what if you look into the Indian context, we have a lot of technological advances. We are we have a leadership of AI machine learning in India. We have a very young population. We have a nationwide connectivity. There are glitches, but we are 97% of the geography of India is connected now. So thanks to certain organizations, whatever. But we have a lot of weaknesses in terms of the scale of population, the educational infrastructure. The state of physical libraries in the countries are absolutely dismal. I mean, we have a public library system which has stopped working ages back, to the extent that there is not even a list of registered public libraries available anywhere. We have a lack of modern pedagogies. We are not following what the world is doing. We are quite lagging behind and so on. So these are the weaknesses that we have to combat against. But we have opportunities, a lot of opportunities. We have a digital proliferation. We have a deep mobile penetration. We have the right attitude from the government in this aspect. We have open international climate, but we have threats in terms of resource constraints. Naturally, we do not have the amount of kind of money that United States of America can put on digital libraries. We have a big geographic expanse. We have linguistic diversity, which is a big challenge for us. US needs to deal in 2 languages, English and Spanish. Canada needs to deal with 2 languages, French and English, but we need to deal with 20 languages. Then, of course, there is shifting political priorities, if I may say in a generic term. So this is the basic, formulation in your mind, conceptualization in your mind as to where is the need, where is the strength, and that's what is your starting point. Obviously, then you set certain specific goals. Certainly set a vision which is long-term, motivational, philosophical. Set a mission which is mid-term, which is transformative, adaptive, contemporary. And then set specific objectives of what you are trying to do, which is agile and action-oriented. Objectives will keep on changing very fast, because if you have achieved, then it does not remain an objective, but it creates new objectives. And finally, you have pervasive principles, which are your driving motto of the whole thing. So this is our vision statement: build up National Digital Library of India as a national knowledge asset, the key driving force of education, research, cultural heritage, innovation, and knowledge sharing in India. You can see there is very big philosophical, and the fact it remains a vision is you will never achieve it, but you will always strive for it. The mission is more specific: to create 24/7 enabled, integrated, ubiquitous digital knowledge source, and to use the digital library to protect and preserve our cultural, academic, scientific heritage. Right? So that's a mission which is at a lower level, but very important. Objectives we have talked of. I've just repeated here for specificity, and those objectives are currently what we are trying to satisfy. Finally, the pervasive motto is to be open and inclusive. That is, whenever you have a decision question, you always revert back to what is the motto. Does it satisfy openness? Does it satisfy inclusivity? Then I do it. If it doesn't, I will not do it. So that's the kind of a broad goal setting that you need for the design. Of course, in any design, the next that comes is the architecture of the design. Now, in a digital library, the architecture itself has a lot of different meaning. So the first architecture is what I call a layered architecture, which says that how do you look at digital contents? You need to keep a digital collection first, digital repository. How can you make a digital repository? Pooja had asked, how do you get the contents? So contents can be created, authoring services, or they can be acquired. Right. So several projects are creating contents. NDLI specifically does not create content that much, though we do some, and rest of it is borrowing, which is acquisition. But a repository, just putting them together does not make it a digital library till at least you have a dissemination service. That is, there is a way to find a content and there is a way to access that content. You provide those services, put the next layer on the repository, which makes you a digital library. And then for a big digital library, aspiring digital library for National Digital Library of India, you put a whole lot of additional services on top of the basic search and access, which I tried to show you. You provide learning services, that is, you relate different types of contents for common issue of learning. You cater for experience-based learning. I'll talk a little bit about more about that. You provide multifaceted personalization, that is like multilingual interface, or when we are able to provide an interface for the differently abled, these are personalization services. You provide localization for multilinguality, and so on. And how do you know that you have covered all services that are required? You would never know, because time changes, requirements change, new services are required. So you put a set of open services, put a set of APIs, application programming interfaces, and using that, new services can be built up. So we have a set of APIs through which any one of you can access the content, the metadata in the library, and create new services. Like our mobile app is an app, is a service created using those APIs. So this is a basic layered architecture which you develop. And the backbone of that will be our whole metadata schema, which we'll talk about. The other side is content view architecture. The layered architecture is how you build it. Content view architecture is how you view it. You have already seen the view. This is this black box, literally black in color, and black box as a purpose also, because you do not know what's inside. 6 crore contents inside. Can be generically searched and browsed through this interface, which you saw here. I just shown you. So you can search and browse here. But you also make below different verticals catering to different groups of user and services that they need. These are called the collections. So there is a school vertical, as you can see here. These are domain vertical, like in engineering, in science, in humanities, literature. So you come to each one of them, you build up services which are focused onto those kind of users and services. You have competitive examination vertical. I have not shown you. We have one in terms of the JEE main and JEE advanced examination. You have data vertical. Again, I have shown you a little bit in terms of the COVID data set. Application vertical, we still do not have. We are in the process of building up. So this is a content view architecture. So you can either blindly go and search browse on the content depth baseline, or you can have view specific custom interface and search, some of which I just showed you in the walkthrough. And using the domain metadata, using the presentation of that particular vertical of the collection, you can take the items out and the users can use it. So how you want to view this? So your basic layered architecture will lead you to the content baseline and the genericity of the search, but verticals will keep on happening. Because you visualize some new requirement, you'll create a vertical based on the same basic infrastructure of the layer architecture and create new view for your new set of requirements, new set of users. So that's another architectural view that you need to decide on in the digital library design. The third I will skip here. Of course, to support that, you need an IT architecture, systems architecture of how you do that. If somebody is interested in the specific, IT implementation architecture, then I can discuss separately. And while that physical IT infrastructure and the requirement architecture of layered and content view exist on two sides, in the middle it's the software architecture of how the IT actually happens. So this is a software architecture. So these two are for the IT specialists who are catering for this. So there could be several other forms of architecture also, but these four are the basic that you need to decide in the team for a digital library design. Now, the next one is the most critical, the service design. What are the services that you are going to provide? And there is no end to the service design. So I have categorized the service design here broadly in three categories. I mean, there's no golden rule for this. So I've done it based on my understanding, because after having studied, struggled for last 5 years, I have come to the conclusion that there is no very standard authenticated source on these kind of design principles and so on. Like software design has a lot of books on design principles, but digital library design has a couple of books, but they talk about only few tools, but not the principles. So one group of services I called user service, where the end user is involved in the service. But the end user could be involved as a consumer, because the end user is using the content, or the end user could be a producer, it's giving back content to you, or it could be both. So if the end user is in the loop of a service, then I call it a user service. Second is what I call the infra service or infrastructural service, which is a design and framework that enables the delivery of the user services based on the IT services. So it sits in between these two. IT services, the online system, the automation system, the front end, back end, everything that needs to happen in terms of IT programming and systems programming tools and all that. User services is what you want to cater to. In between, how do you do the linkage? What is the framework to which this will operate? That design aspect, that framework is the infrastructural services that you need to provide. Okay. So let us take a little bit of look into that. So this is the overall, sum of the services. Generic services, search, filter, browse, you have seen. These are the user services. Metadata services are the infra or design service. That is, metadata is the core of how the whole thing works. It's the ontology, the curation is the core of that. Then there are user services to track the user's experience, collection services to build up collections, as we have demonstrated, extensional user services like involving the user in multiple different ways, backend IT services to take this whole thing forward on the IT. So I will just touch upon the first of these user and design services, IT infra services, but I will not talk about the IT backend IT services because that's not in the scope of this lecture. So in terms of generic services, you have seen what is there. Now let me just highlight again the difference with Google that we are trying to make, or any digital library is trying to make. Think about two students. She's Payal. Her native language is Hindi. She studies in class 8. And she is particularly scared of physics. Magnetism is something she does not understand. She has a Moto G5, kind of a phone with 4 GB RAM. And it has Google, YouTube, all of that. And then you have Shomik, who is a third-year engineering student. He's interested to apply for PhD position. He needs references on nanostructured materials and different unified field theory and all that. He has an iPhone. It also has Google, YouTube, etc. Now the question is, will both of them be able to use Google and get a good success? Now both of them use Google and try magnetism. This is little dated. This is 2 years back. So at that time, how many zeros have to count? 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. So 2.2 crore results come on magnetism. Right. So who has in Google seen beyond the third page? Probably nobody. So other than the magnetism wiki, what you see in the first 3-4 pages neither caters to Payal nor to Shomik. That's the difficulty we are talking of, and we all know that. So what we do, we will put 5 other keywords to narrow our search. And what about those who are not skilled enough to do that? Right? So that is where you can use the NDLI search mechanism that I demonstrated. So for magnetism, you're looking for magnetism, we did. You can choose the educational level 5 to 8. And the search results immediately gets down to 55. And then, since Payal is more familiar with Hindi, she can switch over to an Hindi interface. And out of this 55 is expected to get a much better fit for what she wants to know. Like, say, how does a bar magnet work? Or how to do an experiment to find the field structure of a bar magnet and so on. On the other hand, Shomik searches for magnetism, but uses a search filter which is scarier technical paper. So you can see that Shomik is getting results which are from CSIR Institute and various different magnetically separable, reusable copper, ferrite, and all that, all research stuff. Whereas Payal is not getting those kind of stuff because so that is what makes the search browse filter mechanism based heavily on the metadata really effective for NDLI. And that is the generic purpose use for NDLI. I'll skip the next several slides, which are snapshots of what we have done in the walkthrough, because that's already have been shown. So given this paradigm, we need to see what is the infrastructure that goes into that. That's metadata. So whole of digital library design relies heavily on metadata engineering. And metadata, as you have known, and we have already talked about significantly during our example instructions, that it is a collection of fields which are supposed to describe the content. So if we have to do that, then we need to zero in on a standard. So we talk about the metadata standard, and the metadata standards look like this. So like if this elephant is a metadata, then these are the different standards. So there is hundreds of metadata standards in the world. So you will wonder that there is one content, and why should there be so many different standards for defining the metadata? The reason is simple. Metadata, as it is specified, is data about data, is an incomplete conceptualization of metadata. Metadata is actually content plus context, or content plus intent. Together is the metadata. That is, you have the content, and where you want to use it will mean that you need a different set of descriptors in the metadata field. So if you are talking about, these are details of what I'm saying. So if you are talking about, let me skip a few slides which are generic in nature. So you may have a metadata descriptor which is generic. Generic means it describes the basic identity of the item, right? Generic attributes. And it is adopted from Dublin Core Standard, which is an international standard. So it has different things to uniquely identify that content in the context of all contents in the world. If you are talking about a book, it is the title, the author, the publisher, the year of publication, etc., 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 which come into the generic metadata. But when you want to answer questions for Shomik and Payal, you need educational metadata, because you need to describe a content in terms of which level of education it is appropriate for. Is it easy, medium, or really tough in terms of difficulty? What is the learning time for that content? How much time a student of that level expected to spend to learn that item? So you need a different descriptor, because the context is different. The context is not describing that item. The context is to specify how that content can be used for educational purposes. So there is a different standard by IEEE called Learning Resource Metadata Initiative, which has that kind of a metadata standard. Then you have a thesis metadata, which is describing the thesis dissertations that are being submitted in India. So it has a part of that is who is the supervisor, what is the institute, when was the degree awarded, and so on and so forth. So that's a metadata standard from an organization called InflibNet. The standard is known as Shodh Ganga Thesis Metadata Standard. So you take such profiles and you could pick up from several other profiles, whatever you need to do. You need to describe newspaper items, you will have a different metadata. You need to describe dance, you have a different metadata. You need to describe, say, medical science, you have a whole range of metadata for drugs, metadata for pathology, metadata for radiology, so on and so forth. You take the appropriate set of descriptors, put them in a profile and plug into this metadata standard. That's the NDLI metadata standard. I've given a link of where you can find this document on our project website. So this is the simplest form of the structure, that you have generic metadata, which has author, date, description, etc. This is learning metadata, which is board, difficulty level, type of learning material, educational level, and so on. You have research metadata, your thesis metadata, and you could have several others. So I will not take each one of this, but that's a sample example. I searched with digital humanities. You can search NDL with digital humanities. As of 2 hours back, it gave me 4,51,156 results. And some of them are picked up. Not all, of course, some not possible. So this is the title descriptor, Journal of Digital Humanities. There is no author, of course, because it's a journal. This is a source that it comes from. This is the learning resource type. It is a journal. This is a language. The access is open. Subject is social sciences. Of course, I've given ... because social sciences is not a top level subject area. And these metadata for this item have not been specified for whatever reason. Maybe the annotator did not know, maybe it was not consistent, and so on. Whereas if you take a different one, say the airship, which also comes out in this search, it has an author, E.M. Foster, very well-known author. It comes from LibriVox. It's an audio book. So actually there, digital humanities have been found in the context of a story. So it has come out in that way. So it has digital humanities in that. It's a storybook used there. It is English, it's open. So you can see different kinds of access possibilities and so on. So if you think of for 6 crore items, these and several other metadata fields have been populated. And that's the basic infrastructure on which you build up anything else. So naturally, as you have the standard, the question, of course, is, I will not go into depth of this anymore, is how do you acquire this metadata? So which is a big challenge. So there are ways to create manually. Of course, you would not be able to scale. You can extract a lot of metadata in an automated fashion by using, simple computer algorithms. Like given a book in PDF form, you can extract the title, the author, the year of publication, the publisher in a very easy computer program. You can do some by kind of machine learning. For example, subject classification. You can look at the chapter and section headings, index keywords, and get to a subject classification through a machine learning system. But some will still need manual intervention, like if you want to find out the learning time. The learning time would be very, very difficult to get in an automated fashion. But a lot of automation, a lot of format translation, a lot of curation is required, which can be manual, but again, whole manual curation is almost impractical. So we have created a lot of automation tools which tell you that which needs the attention of the manual curator, and others about which the system is pretty confident, 95% confident that it is correct, so you don't need that. Finally, we ingest that in the whole big store. So the following slides I will skip. which talks a little bit in more detail about acquisition. I will talk about an interesting service, which we say is a surrogator service. It's again not on the live site yet. It is like many of you have come across a situation where you are looking for an article and you find it and you say that there is a journal which is subscribed and your institution does not have a subscription. So what do? You can't get that journal. So what we do something very interesting. We then start looking by that title or part of the title and see, okay, maybe the author had published in some conference which is not subscribed, which is not under subscription, or maybe that author has done a preprint hosting and so on. So in this way, we try to search, and maybe after some search, we may be able to find a version of that paper which is not the actual that you are looking for. It's about 95% the same. So that is what we call a surrogate. So a surrogate service is a smart, intelligent machine learning based service that we have designed, and it's under test right now, which, given a content which is behind the wall, you can find approximation to that content in a ranked manner, of which can act as its surrogate. So these are kind of services that you can provide. Experience tracking is another interesting, so I'll spend just a couple of minutes. We have left it at the point of Payal and Shomik saying that you could go to the educational level, choose 5 to 8 for Payal, you get focused result. You can choose career studies for Shomik, you get focused result. But the question is, will the user be smart enough to be able to make those choices? Usually no. So what you do, you have to learn what the user needs from the user's behavior without asking the user. And that is called experience tracking. That is, the user is using the digital library. And you keep tracking what the user is using, which site it has gone to, what the content is downloaded, how much time a video has been seen, how much time has been spent on certain areas and so on. You keep on keeping records of that. And then based on that, when the user does a next search, you use that information to kind of make a hypothetical model of that user, which is not identifiable with that human being, but is use of the library. And based on that, you provide the results. Now, this might sound quite abstract to you, and this is done through some APIs called TinCan API, and using a learning record store where you keep track of what is happening. But all of you have a first-hand experience of this experience tracking in e-commerce domain. You must be buying items from Amazon, Flipkart, eBay, Snapdeal, those. And if you have an account and consistently have been going to one of these sites 4 or 5 times, looking for different items, maybe in the grocery, maybe in your box, maybe in your household and so on, you'll find that next time you go, it is telling you that customers who bought this also bought that. We suggest that you look into this. Maybe that day you are not interested in that item. But if you look at those suggestions carefully, at least in future, please do that, you'll find that majority of those suggestions are not irrelevant to your lifestyle or your liking. So how does the site know that? You have not given any details to the site except your possibly your email address or maybe phone number at the most, which they don't use. So how do they do is based on the searches that you have done, the time that you have spent on different items, either the books or the grocery or the kind of grocery that you have, the kind of price range you have chosen, the kind of selections from 10 items that you have made, all those are recorded in the learning record store. And based on that, a hypothetical model of the purchasing customer is built on which offers are made, on which your recommendations are suggested. So this is widely available in the e-commerce domain. What we are trying to do is to create that same thing in the world of learning. So here's a basic example of how you can do this. But I have to close. I'm sure I've run out of time. I have to talk about collection services. So finally, you saw the collections in terms of the services. So Basically, each one of them is a thematic collection. I have already shown you this. So this is CBSE examination. So you take a theme and build a collection on that. This is a school collection. We saw that. This is, I was talking of NDLI Tutor, JEE Main and JEE Advanced collection, where we have actually contributed a lot of content by providing solutions for several years, over a decade of JEE Advanced papers and of JEE Main paper as well. And this is a sample solution page that you see. And our approach is not just to give the question and the answer key, but not also the workout of the solution. Of course, those are there. But we also try to give some insight in terms of if there are 4 possibilities and you have to choose one of them, then instead of solving the problem, can you do some quick back of the envelope kind of reasoning to knock out 2 of the options? It actually is possible in most cases. If you knock that out, then you are left with 2. So even a blind guess gives you 50% marks. I'm not saying that you'll do that, but those are insight strategies of how you handle the multiple choice, multiple select questions in a more smart way. Something that I actually learned from my son when he was studying his engineering. I mean, that's ages back though, maybe almost 10 years back. But that's when I learned that, well, you don't need to solve every multiple choice question. You can eliminate. Multiple choice is elimination. So we have shown for 10 years question paper on each question as to what could be the strategies for doing that. That's a big learning that this tutorial homes try to give you. Besides the collection, you need to decide about the diversity of TLM, that is teaching learning material types. What kind of material, like here we are showing examples of school learning in terms of lab material, model answer, question papers. So you will decide on those for building a right collection. Then a contextual presentation. How do you present that? Would you present it as a list or as a hierarchy that you see here? This is content stitched hierarchy that you see. So presentation is another important factor for a collection design. I'm giving examples from NDLI, but you will find the instances of each one of these in several different digital libraries. Maybe many of them do not use all of these, but everybody uses some of these strategies for designing the collection. And since we are focused on education, we also give a lot of focus on the alternate pedagogy in a collection. Like will the learning resource type be an educational app or educational game or hands-on experiments and so on, which are obviously different from our usual classroom pedagogy that we have. Examples are here for you to really pass through and then try out on the library to see. So when I come to a collection, I gave you glimpses of item metadata. So this is glimpses of the collection metadata. For example, the CBSE that we saw, the collection has a target user, which is board examinees. Learning resource type are like this: audio, book, notes, PowerPoint presentation, question paper, solutions, very, very important for CBSE examinees and so on. The sources are different government bodies, KVs, as you saw. The subjects are subjects of CBSE, as you saw. And the class is now becomes a metadata here in CBSE examination, because it's critical whether it's for class 10 or it's for class 12. Similarly, for NDLI Tutor, for COVID, I've given this data for you to study and get more insight into this. Finally, there are several extensional services that you can think of, several of them. For example, one is make communities of your library users, like your locality library user can build up clubs. NDL also is launching the clubs soon, possibly next month. Then you can do crowdsourcing. All these contents that you are seeing, majority of them are initiated through our request and the partners, but we are also reaching out to the content provider. If some of you have created a nice video, if have created a nice lecture material, or created a nice tutorial, you can come over, share it with us. So content can come from crowdsourcing. Crowd can help with the metadata. So several libraries allow crowd to edit metadata and then from that learn what is the correct metadata. There could be cataloging of for physical books that could be provided as an add-on service. So these are the different kinds of services. So that's the club details are given here. So, and then finally, you will have analytics and impact assessment, because this is just one-way traffic. You have done the design, created the library. Then, do people really get benefited? Have you done the right thing? Have you done the things right? Who answers those questions? There's nobody can answer those questions. So you need to do a lot of impact assessment. So there are different forms of impact assessment. You can take direct statistics. You can take social signals from, say, Facebook, Instagram, and so on. You can take interaction signals. You can evaluate your services in terms of, what is the response time. You can take make usability evaluation, and so on and so forth. So there are several of those impact assessment methods. In the subsequent slides, you'll get a glimpse of the different analytics and impact assessment that NDLI uses. So I will just ask you to take a look if you have time sometime. So this will give you an idea of how do you finally assess how well you have done. This is for the social media. Now, in the next 5 minutes, I will conclude with sharing with you the lessons that COVID has finally given us in the context of digital library and in the context of digital library design. So I have taken two parameters of design. I say planning and say disruption. So this is looking at design in a very different disruptive transformative form. So you say that how much design is planning always. So how much of planning will you do? And how much of uncontrolled change or controlled change you will allow? So if you plan and do something, then naturally you need to change what is established, well proven. So that disrupts your life. So planning and disruption are always competitive parameters in design. So here is on the x-axis is planning and the y-axis is disruption and low to high. So before digital library, you had a library which evolved over 10,000 years. Physical books, physical space, book, journal, issue, return, catalog referencing, academic library, public library, very well established system, slowly evolved with huge amount of time. Not any decisive planning went into it. It was very micro plan at every stage, slowly it evolved. And nobody wanted to disrupt things. It just evolved the way it did. Everybody replicated what others have been doing. Then it came the digital library. And digital library wanted not to disturb what was there. So disruption was not an acceptable parameter by anyone. So for books, you brought in digital books, you got multimedia contents, you created parallels of search and browse, you created access, which is anytime, anywhere. Everybody loved it because it does not disrupt. But people were not been very receptive of all these violet things, or violet or magenta, whatever that color is, which also are consequences of digital libraries, that distance learning, online learning. It took us 15 years to authenticate that a degree earned or a certificate earned from SWAYAM is acceptable in a usual university. And that too on the
Hi, I think, am I audible to everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I think
Yes, ma'am.
Professor Das is disconnected. Let's wait. Let's give him some time to log
What
back.
happened? 23rd March 2020. 900 universities closed. Everything on. So you have to respond now. For responding now, you do not have time. You do not have time to plan. Disruption has already happened. You have to react immediately. Disruption is high, planning is low. So I remember during March, April, the study from home that you saw, we came out with this within a span of 3 weeks, where the entire team was working from home. Something that we did not manage to do in the previous 4.5 years because we were very scared to disrupt what is going on. We were very focused on doing meticulous planning, but things did not happen. COVID response to COVID research happened during this time within an effort of 1 month, and 4 people worked on this. Hugely appreciated by everyone. COVID there was naturally media testimonials and all that. So it does show that this transition that COVID gave us is not only about pandemic being destructive to this, but it has been disruptive. And, the digital library communities have been innovative enough to react to a new design paradigm in digital libraries. Now comes the next question, which you all, the students of digital humanities, digital archive have to answer is, what happens going forward? If there's something called post-COVID, whatever, people are saying new normal, neo-normal, whatever that time is, where both the disruption has to be acceptable at a high level. At the same time, there has to be good planning to provide good services. There is no, there is no substitute for planning well, but you have to accept right disruption to be able to deliver. So digital library will become the knowledge in action, access for all. NEP has talked about, new education policy has talked about so much. Democratization of education, rural libraries, broadband accesses. How can you make your digital library work with a very narrow band? Quasi-offline access across K-12 to higher educational institutions. How open knowledge and accreditation can work. Can these library spaces be used for different forms of open space of interactions and so on? So the vista is open to you all. It is big, wide, and open. And with that note, I would like to thank you all and end on this presentation on digital library design. Thank you all very much. If there are questions, then I would love to take on.